Well, hi everybody. We really appreciate you coming tonight. I want to start by thanking Jarkos for not only offering the facility, which was very nice in the first place, but then going way over and above with the setup and the sound system and all that stuff. We really appreciate Mike and Wanda for doing that. I know Griffin helped a lot, and so we appreciate their support for that. It is exciting to be here. We didn't know that we'd be able to do an in-person anything. So if you think about when we started our season, we could not even have the whole team together. And then we went about 6 weeks where we didn't really do much in school at all. And now we're able to actually come together and do an in-person. What you see tonight will be different than what we've been doing all year. It's been almost a whole calendar year since the kids have done a trial in person. And we haven't even really practiced this. So there may be a few little glitches along the way, but it will give you a good idea, at least for sure, of the trial and all the work that they have been putting in. And I know I say this every year, but that's what makes mock trials so different, is that the kids do all the work. They are the strategists. They write everything that they're saying in teams with their partner. They plan and prepare and do everything. And my role is really just a facilitator. And they get a lot of good advice from Jeff, but even that is limited in our time of practice with him. And so much of this is done by the students. And I believe that's often why we are successful as a team. Sometimes we face teams where the students are saying what their coach told them to say. And our kids aren't doing that. Our kids are saying what they prepared to say and what they want to say. And that comes with a lot of thinking on their feet. That comes with so many good things that come with that. And life lessons and all that good stuff. We can talk very briefly about the state tournament that obviously will be virtual. You all know the kids have been competing from home or a business or something like that. And that has really worked well. And so we'll do it the exact same way for state. State is Wednesday and Thursday, March 3rd and 4th. And at this point, I anticipate the kids will be out of school all day for both of those days. And in the morning, they'll be able to prepare as they would if we were at the state tournament in person. And then there'll be a team meeting at noon and preparation for that kind of thing. And then I believe round 1 is at 2 o'clock on that Wednesday. And there will be the opportunity for all of you to log in as spectators, if you wish to do that. And so I will email out the link for that. You would go into the Zoom if your son or daughter wants you to do that. Your camera's off, your mic is off. You have to name yourself in a certain way. And I can give all that information as it gets closer. So we're guaranteed the round 1. Round 2 is at 7 o'clock at night. And so there would be a little break in between, but primarily the kids would stay at home. That'd be a little different, obviously, than what we normally do. We'll find out at maybe 4 or 5 o'clock who our opponent is for that 7 o'clock trial, and then there's a trial the next morning at 9. We're guaranteed those 3. If you've been to state before, it's very similar to that. And then, if we should be fortunate enough to be in the state championship, which I'm sure will happen, we would then be at 2 o'clock on that Thursday. And all of us can watch the state championship trial on YouTube. Not even like into Zoom, or it's just going to be wide open broadcast for everybody. So that would be kind of cool too, for some of us that kind of, if you're interested in the trial and the kids will be able to watch the strategy of the teams and all that stuff, that will be on that Thursday. Okay? Otherwise, thanks again for coming. When we're done, there are some treats out in the lobby provided by one of the witnesses' family. That fits very well with the theme and what they do in the trial. I realize I also want to thank Alex Miller for his help at the start of the season. He was also helpful as we got going, especially when we were distanced and unable to be together. He zoomed in some, and we appreciated that too. And I'm sure I'm forgetting other people, but primarily we just really want to thank you for your support of our program. You obviously are supporting your kids because your kids are working so hard, and that's really what gets us to where we are. Okay, so I think that's all I have to say. Thanks, Albert. Take it over.
Thank you. Okay, we will get started then. Call the case of Peyton Knox versus Nixon Lodge and Catering. counsel, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Would you like to do your introductions first?
Yes, we would, Your Honor. Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Lauren Versteeg, and tonight I will be providing the direct examination of Riley Swain, the cross-examination of Chris Nixon, and I will also be providing the closing argument tonight. My co-counsel?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Griffin Jarko, and tonight I will be providing the opening statement along with the direct examination of Peyton Knox and the cross-examination of Tony Olivia.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Chance Tunison, and tonight I'll provide the direct examination of Jordan Knox and the cross-examination of Bobby Stewart. Our witnesses?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Luke Thorson, and tonight I will be portraying Peyton Knox.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Jaden Hart, and I am portraying Jordan Knox tonight.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Xavier Carpino, and I will be portraying Riley Swain. Our bailiff?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Simon Blanke, and I will be the bailiff for tonight's trial.
You, defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Caitlin Anderson, and I will be doing the direct examination of Chris Nixon and the cross-examination of Riley Swain, as well as the closing argument today. My co-counsel?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Ross Bergman. This evening I will be providing the direct examination of Bobby Stewart and the cross-examination of Jordan Knox.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is John Miller. Tonight I will be giving the direct examination of Tony Olivia, the cross-examination of Peyton Knox, as well as the opening argument, for the defense. Our witnesses?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Parker Carbonell, and today I will be portraying Tony Olivia.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Ainsley Robinson, and tonight I'll be portraying Bobby Stewart.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Ella Lemieux, and tonight I will be portraying Chris Nixon. Our bailiff?
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Simon Blanke, and I will be the bailiff for tonight's trial.
Thank you. Plaintiff, do you have any pretrial matters you'd like to address?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff asked for permission to use the lectern and move about the well.
Yes to the lectern. I would try to limit moving about the well with the microphones.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff also asks permission to use notes at the lawyer table,
Yes?
and the plaintiff would ask that the court accepts all pretrial stipulations.
The court does.
The plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Defense, do you have any other pretrial motions?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense also asked that we have use of water at the lawyer's table,
You may.
and we ask the same stipulations be allowed to us as the plaintiff.
Yes, both sides can have the stipulations. They're mutual to each party.
Thank you.
If there's no further pretrial matters, plaintiff, are you ready to proceed with your opening?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Today you'll hear the case of Peyton Knox versus Nixon Lodge and Catering. On June 19, 2019, Peyton Knox entered into a contract with Nixon Lodge for a wedding. This wedding was going to be the wedding of Peyton Knox and his fiancée, Parker Stevenson's dreams. They had planned on inviting 300 guests and had expected around 250 people to attend. The most important part of their wedding was the date. They had planned for the wedding to take place on July 4th, 2020, their 5-year anniversary. However, in early March, businesses began to shut down, including Nixon Lodge. After a series of executive orders in June, businesses were allowed to reopen with certain restrictions. The restrictions for wedding venues stated that each venue could reopen at 25% of their maximum capacity. This would allow Nixon Lodge to have 175 people in their venue, with maintained social distancing. However, Nixon Lodge decided to restrict this number even further along with other factors that weren't outlined in the guidelines. In the end, Peyton Knox was left with a small wedding of only 75 guests, which is only 10% of Nixon Lodge's maximum capacity. Along with this, Peyton Knox was not allowed any of the food and beverages that they had been promised for their wedding, along with not even being allowed to dance or mingle with their own guests. All of these decisions made by Nixon Lodge were based off of what was best for them, not based off what was best for both parties. At the end of today's trial, with the testimony of our 3 witnesses, we will have proven the necessary points beyond a preponderance of the evidence to show that Nixon Lodge did in fact breach the contract by not providing reasonable accommodations to the original contract. In order to prove this, we, the plaintiff, must prove three elements beyond a preponderance of the evidence. First, we must prove that a contract was formed. This point has been jointly stipulated. Second, we must prove the performance of the plaintiff of any conditions precedent to his right to demand performance by the defendant. And third, we must prove that the defendant breached the contract. These three elements will be proven by a preponderance of the evidence by the end of today's trial with the evidence that we will present to the court. Our first witness to come to the stand today will be Peyton Knox, one half the wedding couple and professional hockey player. Peyton Knox met Parker Stevenson about 5 years ago, and they have been perfect for each other ever since. Tonight, Peyton Knox will talk about how he planned this wedding and the services that they requested. More importantly, he'll talk about the pandemic and how it affected his wedding plans. He'll talk about the restrictive measures that Nixon Lodge put in place and show how they went too far. Peyton Knox will testify that Nixon Lodge left him with a small and insufficient wedding with only 75 guests, with almost none of the original contract items. Instead of being compassionate and understanding, Nixon Lodge only did what was best for them, not what was best for both parties. Our second witness to come to the stand today will be Jordan Knox, Peyton Knox's mother and retired business owner. Mrs. Knox's involvement in today's case is warranted because she helped pay for a large amount of the wedding and was involved in the planning phase of the wedding as well. Tonight, Mrs. Knox will show the lengths that they went to get certain aspects of the wedding, and then show how Nixon Lodge refused many of those aspects. Lastly, she'll talk about yet another unreasonable restriction put in place by Nixon Lodge, a rescheduling fee. Our last witness to come to stand today will be Riley Swain, the wedding planner for Peyton and Parker's wedding. Riley Swain has been in the wedding planning business for the past 7 years and recently started his own business. He was hired by Peyton Knox and Parker Stevenson on March 14, 2019 to plan the wedding of their dreams. Today, Mr. Swain will discuss the services of that wedding and the cost that those services included. He will also testify to the fact that Nixon Lodge refused to allow many of these services for their own choice, not the restrictions of the government regulations. Once again, showing that Nixon Lodge only did what was best for them, not what was best for both parties. Each one of our witnesses today will prove that Nixon Lodge did breach the contract and shall be held liable for their own actions. Peyton Knox will show the restrictive measures put in place by Nixon Lodge and show how they went too far, ultimately showing that Nixon Lodge only did what was best for them, not what was best for both parties. Jordan Knox will explain the rescheduling fee and show why it was completely unreasonable. And Riley Swain will testify to the fact that Nixon Lodge was making Peyton Knox and the wedding party pay for parts of their wedding that they couldn't even have. At the end of today's trial, we will have proof of the necessary points that Nixon Lodge did breach the contract by not providing reasonable accommodations to the original contract. We thank you for your time today, and at the end of today's trial, we ask that you rule in favor of the plaintiff. Thank you.
Defense counsel, are you intending to do your opening now?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
May it please the court, opposing, sorry, is this on? This on? Okay, sorry. May it please the court, opposing counsel, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. First, I want to thank you for the time and attention that you're giving here today. And second, I want to remind you that this is a breach of contract case. Tonight, the evidence will show that the plaintiff cannot establish a breach of contract by the defense. The plaintiff's claim tonight is a story of emotion and a chain of overreactions to the unprecedented global pandemic that is COVID-19 and the unforeseeable emergency public health restrictions that followed. In reality, the plaintiff had lavish plans for a dream wedding that were upended by COVID-19. And that is unfortunate, and it is sad. However, that is not a breach of contract by the defendant that entitles the plaintiff to any form of compensation. In reality, the evidence will show that the plaintiff chose not to abide by their own contract. The reality is that they walked away, they failed to pay the full fee by the required date, and they canceled their wedding. Tonight, the plaintiff has the burden of proof. To prove a breach of contract, they must prove 3 elements by a preponderance of the evidence. 1, they must prove that there was an enforceable contract signed between the defendant and the plaintiff. 2, they must prove that the plaintiff did everything required of them of said contract. And 3, that the defendant did not do everything required of them under the contract. Tonight, the evidence will show that the plaintiff cannot prove the 2nd and 3rd elements. Today, the 3 witnesses for the defense, Tony Olivia, Bobby Stewart, and Chris Nixon, will testify without anger, without frustration, but rather with clear and reasonable minds how exactly the plaintiff cannot prove the 2nd and 3rd elements. Bobby Stewart, a loyal wedding planner who is willing to ignore facts and reality to bring the Knoxes their wedding, will try to tell you that Nixon Lodge was unreasonable in their restrictions and that they did the bare minimum to accommodate the Knoxes' wedding. Chris Nixon, however, the owner of Nixon Lodge, will testify that Nixon Lodge was more than reasonable and even made accommodations that they weren't even required to. Chris Nixon will also establish her defense, force majeure. Force majeure means that the events facing Nixon Lodge were a combination of an act of God and government restrictions, a catastrophic event. Chris Nixon will testify that Nixon Lodge was well within their rights due to this force majeure clause to limit the guest count to 75 persons, to not allow dancing, and to enforce social distancing. Nixon Lodge is not liable for their inability to meet the plaintiff's unreasonable standards during COVID-19 because the plaintiff cannot prove the 3rd element, that Nixon Lodge did not do everything required of them under the contract. Jordan Knox will try to tell you that she has never seen a company or venue act the way Nixon Lodge did and that they were completely unreasonable. Jordan Knox is upset, and that is understandable. However, Jordan Knox has never worked through a global pandemic and has absolutely no experience with which to judge another company's performance during one. Tony Olivia and Chris Nixon, however, will testify that Nixon Lodge was more than reasonable and, in fact, made many accommodations that they weren't required to. In reality, the plaintiff failed to pay for their wedding, and due to that, Nixon Lodge could have canceled the Knox's wedding. Despite this, Nixon Lodge made all the accommodations they could. They met their obligations, but it just wasn't enough for the plaintiff. But that does not establish a breach of contract. Now, Peyton Knox is angry, but that anger should be directed at COVID-19, not Nixon Lodge. Peyton Knox will tell you a maudlin story about how his dream wedding was destroyed. That because the government imposed restrictions upon Nixon Lodge, it was somehow Nixon Lodge's fault. Again, no one is happy with these restrictions, least of all Nixon Lodge. However, Peyton Knox will fail to bring up one crucial detail. He did not pay for his wedding as required by the contract. Because Nixon Lodge never received full payment for their services, they were well within their rights to withhold any and all services from the plaintiff. They didn't. Instead, they powered through government restrictions and a global pandemic, offering every possible reasonable accommodation to bring the plaintiff the absolute best wedding they could. But it just wasn't enough for the plaintiff. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Your Honor, after you hear the defense's case today, after the testimony of our 3 witnesses, we are confident that you will agree that the plaintiff has failed to prove 2 out of the 3 elements they were required to. My co-counsel and I thank you for your time and ask that you rule in favor of the defense.
Witness, are you ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Peyton Knox to the stand.
Please raise your right hand. You promise that the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the rules of the mock trial competition.
I do.
You may now take the stand.
Please say your name for the court, spelling the last.
My name is Peyton Knox, K-N-O-X.
What is your current occupation, Mr. Knox?
Well, before the pandemic hit, I was a professional hockey player. I was actually chosen to play for the U.S. Olympic team. However, now, like many Americans, the pandemic has shut down my hockey season, and I am currently unemployed.
Before the pandemic, what work did you do?
Well, when I was younger and I wasn't in the rink, I spent a lot of time at my parents' shop. I did small chores like sweeping floors or taking out garbage. Eventually, I started doing more important things that required a bit more responsibility. For instance, I would do their bills or do their bank accounts.
Where did this work experience take you?
Well, because of the work I did at my parents' shop, I thought that it would be a good idea to major in business. I thought that I could do it well, and my parents had always told me that I should do what I love.
How did you come to meet Parker Stevenson?
I first met Parker on Hinge, a big dating app. Her smile made my heart grow 2 sizes, so I left her a comment, and she responded. The rest is history. She is the love of my life, and I am so lucky to have her.
And how did you and Parker Stevenson come to meet Riley Swain?
Well, finding a wedding planner is pretty hard work, but eventually Parker and I did find Riley Swain, who we both loved. With Mr. Swain, Parker and I had an extra hand in choosing clothes, reception venues, and even food.
What did you want your wedding to look like?
Parker and I told Riley Swain that we wanted our wedding to be on July 4th, 2020, because it was our 5-year anniversary. We also told Mr. Swain that we wanted it to be close to the Stone Arch Bridge, which was where I first met Parker. Parker and I had a lot of family and friends that wanted to come to our wedding, which ended up being around 250 people, and 150 of them were coming in from all the way out of state.
Did you have a budget for your wedding?
Yes. Parker and I wanted our wedding to be a special day to remember, and with that in mind, we chose a budget of $150,000. Of course, that is a lot of money, but our parents did offer to pick up 70% of the cost.
Who did you and Parker Stevenson choose for your caterer? Wedding venue.
Well, the first time I saw Nixon Lodge, I knew that it was the right place for us. It had not only the look I was searching for, but the layout was just what Parker and I wanted. It had space for my family and even a suite for Parker and I to get ready. In fact, we loved it so much that we put down a deposit before even leaving the venue. Although I had no idea at the time that I was making such a big mistake.
How much was this deposit fee?
It was $6,500 along with a credit card processing fee, which again is a lot of money, but again, Parker and I loved the place so much that we were willing to do it.
Now, who did you and Parker Stevenson choose for your caterer?
Well, Chris seemed really thrilled about us choosing his venue, and he told us about the in-house catering, which we had no problem with, along with the food and beverage minimum. However, our food and beverages ended up being higher than the minimum fee, so we didn't have to worry about that. Actually, we ended up paying half of it for our down payment.
Did you end up signing a contract before you left Nixon Lodge?
Parker and I did end up choosing Nixon Lodge, which did require us signing a contract.
Let the record reflect, I'm joined opposing counsel with a sign pre-marked as Exhibit 2. May I approach the bench?
May
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
I'm now handing what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 2. Could you identify this document, please?
This is the contract I signed with Nixon Lodge.
And on the last page of this contract, is it your signature?
Yes, it is.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of this exhibit?
I believe so, yes.
Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 2 in evidence at this time. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Exhibit 2 is received.
Mr. Knox, how did you keep in touch with Chris Nixon?
Well, over the course of the next year, Chris Nixon and I, we exchanged emails around 27 times. We also met 3 times for in-person talks, as well as meeting with his caterer for in-person taste testing.
What did you discuss with the caterer at these in-person taste testings?
Well, Parker and I went taste testing twice, and we chose the gold package for both our dinner and hors d'oeuvres. My parents suggested that we get black truffles as a special treat for our wedding, although I had no idea at the time that they were so expensive. The black truffles were $8,000 extra, had to be ordered in advance, and had a shelf life of only 2 weeks. I thought it was crazy, but you only get married once.
At the end of the day, how much money had you already spent on your wedding?
Well, we ended up paying our full venue and operational expenses, which was around $43,000. We also paid another $18,000, which was half our food and beverage fee. Not to mention the $8,000 extra for the black truffles. The expenses for the event was $75,000, and we paid around $69,000 so far.
Now, we all know what happened in early March of 2020. How did this affect you and your wedding plans?
Well, in early March, Minnesota started shutting down. I was scared and frantic when the stay-at-home order was issued on March 25th because at that time, our wedding was only 3 months away. However, I was a bit relieved when some stores started reopening on June 1st.
What did this mean for your wedding?
Well, while I was relieved, the Minnesota Department of Health put out regulations on weddings on June 4th and even more on June 12th.
How did these new rules affect your wedding plans?
The rules were a bit restraining. We could have our wedding, but we couldn't have any more than 25% of the building's maximum capacity. And furthermore, everyone had to remain seated at all times. With Chris Nixon's rules, the only people that would be dancing would be parkmen.
Knowing all of this, how did you feel moving forward with your wedding?
To be honest, I was uncomfortable and I had doubts.
Why were you uncomfortable?
I found out that a lot of the COVID-19 outbreaks were tied to weddings that didn't follow the recommended or required safety guidelines. And at the time, having a whole wedding was starting to seem a bit ill-advised. I mean, I have 2 grandparents in their 90s, so I was obviously worried about their health.
Where did you go with your concerns?
Well, Parker and I obviously contacted Nixon Lodge. We voiced our concerns and said that we wanted a safer wedding. Again, we were fine with the government regulations, and we felt that they were the best way to do our wedding under the given circumstances.
What was the response from Nixon Lodge?
Nixon Lodge just scoffed. They said that they were already ready to go with their way to do our wedding. It took a lot of talking for them to even think about rescheduling. And when they finally did relent, they offered to let us reschedule, but only if we paid a fee of $3,750.
Could you please refer to Exhibit 2, subsection 4, titled Transfer of Service, on page 53? Now, would you please read starting at fee and end at new event date?
The fee is subject to change based on the new event date.
Mr. Knox, what does this mean?
Well, this means that because our wedding day was going to be moved from a July 4th date on a Saturday to an October 23rd date on a Friday, the fee should have gone down because the October 23rd date is much less desirable than the July date.
Your Honor, let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel has been pre-marked as Exhibit 5K. May I approach the bench? May I approach the witness? Yes. Mr. Knox, I'm now handing you what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 5K for identification purposes. Could you identify this document, please?
This is an email sent by Chris Nixon to me.
And is this your email address?
Yes, it is.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of this exhibit?
I believe so, yes.
Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 5K into evidence at this time. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. Under Rule 408, conduct or statements made in compromise negotiations are not allowed in evidence, and as this exhibit is, conduct or statements made in compromise negotiations, it should not be allowed in evidence.
Response?
Your Honor, we are not using this exhibit to show evidence of furnishing or offering or promising to furnish, accepting or offering or promising to accept, a valuable consideration in compromising or attempting to compromise. We are simply using this exhibit to show the date at which Chris Nixon responded to an email sent by Peyton Knox.
I will allow it for that limited purpose only.
Thank you. Mr. Knox, when was this email sent?
This email was sent on September 2nd, 3 months after I had already emailed Chris Nixon about rescheduling our wedding.
Mr. Knox, what was your rescheduled wedding going to look like according to Chris Nixon?
Well, like I previously said, Parker and I were fine with the government regulations, which called for only 25% of the building's maximum capacity. However, Chris Nixon said that she would only allow a maximum of 75 guests at a time, which is only 10%. Furthermore, Chris Nixon wanted to restrict our food and beverages, which is nowhere in the Minnesota safety guidelines. And even more so, Chris Nixon wanted to limit dancing to only parkland. The Minnesota safety guidelines don't mention that. It's not much of a party if no one can dance.
Mr. Knox, why did you decide to sue the venue?
Knowing the Minnesota safety guidelines, it was clear that Chris Nixon was restricting our wedding far more than what was already deemed safe. And even more so, she was making us pay the same exact amount for a much smaller and more restricted wedding, and even more to reschedule for a less expensive date. I mean, she was having us pay for guests that weren't even allowed to come to the wedding. Chris Nixon took the happiest day of Parker and I's lives from us, and she's trying to make us pay for it.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Knox.
Good evening.
Have you read the Minnesota Department of Health guidelines?
Chris Nixon did send me them, which I did read them, of course, yes.
And would you recognize these documents if they're given to you?
Of course.
Let the record reflect, Your Honor, that I am showing the opposing counsel has been pre-marked as Exhibit 3. Permission to approach the bench? You may. Permission to approach the witness?
Yes.
And are these the Minnesota Department of Health guidelines, Mr. Knox? As well as Nixon Lodge's preparedness plan?
They appear to be, yes.
And does this appear to be a fair and accurate copy of this exhibit?
I believe so, yes.
Your Honor, I ask that Exhibit 3 be offered into evidence at this time. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Exhibit 3 proceed.
Now, Mr. Knox, the Minnesota Department of Health guidelines state that every venue needs to have a preparedness plan, don't they?
That is correct.
And so Nixon Lodge did follow the Minnesota Department of Health guidelines by creating this preparedness plan, didn't they?
Well, Chris Nixon's reasoning for having a limit of 75 guests is because of a health inspector, and I did not see any report or even speak to the inspector.
But they did follow the guidelines by creating a preparedness plan, did they not?
Well, just because they follow the guidelines by creating a plan doesn't mean that the guidelines doesn't mean that the plan is reasonable.
Right. And every venue in the state of Minnesota would have a different preparedness plan, wouldn't they, Mr. Knox?
I can't speak.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge.
Response?
Your Honor, I'm just asking this witness if he has knowledge to this information. Whether he does or not is completely within his knowledge.
That's sustained.
Do you understand, Mr. Knox, that Nixon Lodge was just trying to protect its guests and staff with these restrictions?
I cannot testify to the thoughts and feelings of the people working in Nixon Lodge.
Right, and are you aware today that other clients of Nixon Lodge have been okay with the restrictions that Nixon Lodge has put into place?
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge.
Your Honor, this witness may have knowledge to it, and he may not. That is responsible to let us know that information.
Could you rephrase the question to be consistent with your argument on that response?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, sorry, Mr. Knox. Moving on. Now, the contract, Exhibit 2, stated that the food and beverage fee was due 30 days before the wedding date. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. However, we did point out that we wanted to reschedule before that date was due, which did push it back to 30 days before our new date, which is October 23rd.
And did you ever sign a new contract firmly establishing that October 23rd date.
No, but we were in contact with Chris Nixon until he left us hanging for a solid 3 months.
But you didn't ever sign a new contract, did you?
No, but we were in the process of rescheduling.
Thank you. And June 4th is 30 days before your wedding date, July 4th, is it not?
Yes, and I believe that my wedding planner, Riley Swain, emailed Chris Nixon on June 3rd.
And now, Mr. Knox, this is a very simple yes or no question. You never paid the whole food and beverage fee on or before June 4th, did you?
We didn't have to because our fee was 30 days before our October date, not our July date.
It would have been if you would have signed a new contract, but since you didn't, it was still due on June 4th, correct?
Well, we were in the process of rescheduling, which pushed the date back.
Now, did you ever sign a new contract?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
That's overruled.
Would you like me to restate the question?
Yes, please.
Did you ever sign a new contract with Nixon Lodge?
No, but we were in the
No
process
further
of
questions,
rescheduling.
Your Honor.
Can you redirect?
None, Your Honor.
Witnesses excused. You want to, you ain't gonna speak the exhibits there, I guess. You want to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Jordan Knox to the stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
You may now take the stand.
Please state your name for the court, spelling the last.
My name is Jordan Knox, K-N-O-X.
And Mrs. Knox, what is your current occupation?
I am currently retired in Maine, but I have 50 years of prior business experience.
What kind of business experience?
I ran my own business called Palace Clothiers in Hibbing, Minnesota with my spouse and my son Peyton. But I ended up selling it when I retired back in 2011.
Focusing on your son Peyton, what did he do after working for you in your store?
Peyton had a very long hockey career. He got the right to play at the University of Minnesota to play hockey, and he also got selected to play for the U.S. Olympic hockey team. But more recently, he got engaged and was supposed to be married.
And why was this wedding important to you, Mrs. Knox?
Well, Peyton had worked so hard for years to get where he is today, and he helped me out so much over the years. And this was my way that I wanted to thank him for everything he's done for me. And he is also my only son, so I really only have one chance to get it right. And after all, this is a wedding for an Olympian. But more so, I wanted to thank all my friends, family, and customers for all of the wedding invitations they've given me throughout the years.
Now, Mrs. Knox, do you have any prior experience in the wedding planning business?
Well, I ran Palace Clothiers for over 50 years, and we provided clothing for many weddings. But even though I've been so involved in the process, I don't know much about the industry.
Speaking more on this process, what was the first part of the planning process you went through?
Well, we had many Zoom meetings and emailing, and I also contributed $50,000 towards the total budget. And we also went and looked at Nixon Lodge and took a look at their catering and venue options. And my son Peyton ended up signing a contract with them, and everything seemed to be going great.
Now, could you refer to this contract, which has been entered into evidence as Exhibit 2? And
Yes,
if you
sir.
could refer to page 55, subsection 4 labeled Material Event Change. Could you briefly describe for the court what's included in this section?
Well, it talks about what should happen in the event of a material event change.
And what does this contract define as a material event change?
It says it is any change to the time, date, or location of the wedding, or any increase in 10% of anticipated guests.
Objection, Your Honor. Beyond the scope.
Can you elaborate on that?
Ms. Knox here never signed the contract.
Can you respond?
Your Honor, as this witness testified, she contributed $50,000 to the wedding effort and was in multiple meetings relating to this wedding and the contract, so she would have knowledge of this document.
I'll overrule that objection.
Now, Mrs. Knox, excuse me, was there a material event change involved in your son's wedding?
Yes, we have to change the date to a later time and decrease the number of guests that were involved in the wedding.
Now, did you have any control over these changes?
There were statewide requirements that we had no control over, and many of our guests, including my 9-year-old parents, were at risk because of the pandemic.
And what does it say in this contract should happen in the event of one of these changes?
It says that they should make a reasonable effort to accommodate to the changes, and if they have to offer additional services, we could agree on additional payment later. But unfortunately, we weren't able to agree on any additional payment.
Why weren't you able to agree on additional payment?
To put it simply, we weren't able to agree on any additional payment because they weren't offering us any additional services. We had to pay, they wanted us to pay a $3,750 rescheduling fee when we weren't even planning on canceling the wedding. And also, they wanted us to look at rescheduling, which we had no control over. But instead of increasing our guest list by 10%, we had to decrease the number of guests to 75 people. And to add insult to injury, they canceled all of our catering options, which we paid over $30,000 for.
Mrs. Knox, were you willing to make any compromises with the defendant?
In the current pandemic, we all have to make sacrifices. I too had 9-year-old parents that were at risk because of the pandemic. But I believe that this is no excuse to not at least try to accommodate the contract that they signed. We were willing and able to follow the state guidelines, and we were willing to reschedule the wedding if it made it easier for Nixon Lodge to better accommodate a safe wedding for my son. But while we were willing to work with them, they weren't willing to work with us.
After all this, what was your final course of action?
It became an impossible situation. Nixon Lodge was refusing to be reasonable with us, and they were refusing to give us a refund, even though everything that happened was out of our control. So when I talked to my good friend, Ms. Ginsburg, a lawyer, we decided that seeking legal action was our only option.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Ms. Knox. You sold your business Palace Clothiers back in 2011, correct?
Yes, after 50 years of running my business, I decided it was time to sell.
And would you consider your business to have been a success?
Myself, over the years, I do.
How involved was Peyton when working at the family business?
Well, Peyton helped by taking out the trash at first and just sweeping the floors, but he got more involved by doing our bank deposits and just by doing bigger tasks around the store.
Why did you and your spouse decide to put up an extra $50,000 towards the additional wedding budget?
Well, me and my spouse were so proud of Peyton and what he had accomplished over the years. And he's helped us out so much over the years that we just wanted to thank him. And he's our only child, and so we only have one chance to get it right, I guess. But after all, I love my son, so of course I would put the money for him.
Isn't it right that you also paid an additional $8,000 for the black truffles themselves?
Black truffles are kind of like a French luxury, and me and my husband came over, and we recently started our business after we came over from France. So we did put up the extra money to have that luxury at our wedding.
Ms. Knox, was this wedding a chance for you and your spouse to show off?
Objection, Your Honor, relevant.
Response?
Your Honor, this is clearly stated in the witness's affidavit.
How is it relevant to the case, though?
This is brought up in the direct as well.
Response?
Your Honor, this witness never brought up on direct that this was a chance to show off, or specifically a chance to show off.
I'll sustain that objection.
Moving on, what involvement did you have with the planning of the wedding?
Well, I was involved in all the emailing and all the Zoom meetings, and it was throughout the whole wedding.
But you are not in the wedding planning business yourself, correct?
As I stated earlier, I contributed much of the clothing to many weddings, but I don't know much about the industry now.
Ms. Knox, you were extremely angry by the restrictions put into place by Nixon Lodge, correct?
Well, Nixon Lodge was going and cutting the wedding down to 75 people, and were being very unreasonable, and so I did get a little upset, but I wouldn't say I was super angry about it.
Why did you and your spouse disagree with Nixon Lodge and Catering for putting the restrictions into place?
Well, my son only gets one wedding, so I just wanted it to be everything he's ever dreamed of it. And with them cutting the wedding down like that, it wouldn't be much of a big party for them.
Ms. Knox, are you aware of the preparedness plan put together by Nixon Lodge and Catering?
I am.
Would you refer to Exhibit 3, page 60, specifically under the social distancing subsection? Could you please read the first two sentences under the social distancing tab?
Social distancing of at least 6 feet will be implemented and maintained between workers and customers, clients, patrons, guests, and visitors in the workplace through the following engineering and administrative compliance controls. In accordance with the Hibbing Health Inspector's recommendations due to the age and layout of Nixon Lodge and its ventilation system. No indoor gatherings will exceed 85 people, including staff of the Nixon Lodge and workers. Events will have no more than 75 guests. Notices of social distancing, wearing face masks, and washing hands will be
You can
displayed.
stop there. Thank you. Do you understand why the restrictions were put into place by Nixon Lodge and Catering?
I understand that Nixon Lodge wanted to protect everyone the best they could, but the state had already put out requirements that could have a safe wedding for my son.
To your knowledge, Ms. Knox, is it the business owner's job to take care of their customers and employees?
Well, like every good business owner, it's always a #1 priority, but you also have to remember that you are still running a business at the same time.
Then why did you disagree with Nixon Lodge and Catering for following the recommendations made in order to protect the customers and employees?
Well, I wanted my son's wedding to be everything he ever wanted it to be. And we were willing and able to follow the state guidelines and what they had already deemed safe. And we just thought that Nixon Lodge really restricted the wedding more than it had to be.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Knox, if you could refer back to the social distancing tab in Exhibit 3. And follow along as I read, starting with due to the age and ending with system. So due to the age and layout of the Nixon Lodge and its ventilation system, no indoor gatherings will exceed 85 people, including staff and workers. Mrs. Knox, was your son's wedding planned to be indoors?
It was not. We originally had it planned to be outdoors.
So would this ventilation system have affected your son's outdoor wedding?
I do not believe so, no.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Witness was accused. I'm calling next witness.
The person who would like to call Riley Swain to stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the rules of the mock trial competition? I do. You may now take your stand.
Please state your name for the court, spelling your last name.
My name is Riley Swain. That's S-W-A-Y-N-E.
And what is your current occupation?
Well, I've been a wedding planner for the past 7 years. For the first 6, I worked for Mary Edison in San Francisco, but after eloping, I moved to Minnesota with my husband and started my own business, Swanky Weddings.
So what are your duties as a wedding planner?
As a wedding planner, it's my job to establish a wedding planning timeline. I also help the couple decide on everything from venue, food, dress, and all the other important aspects of the wedding.
And what is your relationship with the Knox family?
I was Peyton and Parker's wedding planner.
When did you first meet the wedding couple?
I first met them on March 14th, 2019, 1 month after they had gotten engaged. We mainly discussed what their plans were for the wedding and how they had met. They wanted to get married on July 4th, 2020, their 5-year anniversary. It was very romantic.
What was the first thing that you discussed about their wedding plans?
Well, the first thing I discuss in any wedding has to be budget. It's very important to keep budget in mind when planning a wedding or things can go south quick.
What was the Knox family's budget?
Well, they had an initial planned budget of $50,000, but both sides of parents decided to chip in an additional $100,000. So this brought the overall budget up to $150,000.
What steps did you take to find the right venue for the wedding?
Well, I set up tours with 3 different venues and even looped the parents in on Zoom. Most of the time these tours was just spent looking around, and the only thing the couple made a real point of discussing was that July 4th date.
Why did you offer Nixon Lodge as a venue option?
Well, it had everything they wanted and more. It had plenty of space outdoors so we could have the wedding ceremony and reception on site. It had an excellent bride and groom suite, and it even had a place for a planned cocktail hour afterwards.
How did the Knox family decide on a catering service?
Well, the Nixon Lodge had an exclusive relationship with an in-house caterer, but we were perfectly fine with this, and even ended up placing down a down payment before the parents hung up from the Zoom call.
How much did the Knox family end up paying after they decided on the catering and venue services?
Well, there was a $6,695 booking fee with a 3% credit card processing fee. We also paid 100% of the venue rental costs and 50% of the cost for food and beverages. This brought the overall total to $69,478.
And what did you do to finalize your plans with the catering service?
Well, by the beginning of 2020, we had pretty much everything figured out with them. We had scheduled 3 in-person meetings, 2 of which included tastings to finalize the menu. They decided upon their big ticket item as black truffles, which alone cost $8,000.
When did COVID-19 start to affect the wedding plans?
Well, in March, everything started shutting down. From communication with the couple, I could tell they were getting worried about having the wedding they wanted or even having a wedding at all. In June, though, businesses started opening up, and we tried to hold out hope and began to get more hopeful.
Was the Knox wedding the only wedding that you had affected by COVID-19?
No, I had many weddings that were also affected, none of whom had booked with the Nixon Lodge, thankfully. Their venues were very understanding and offered...
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Your Honor, this adds weight to the case as it is showing the reasonableness of Nixon Lodge compared to other wedding venues.
Your Honor, these other wedding couples have not booked with the Nixon Lodge, so therefore it is not applicable to this case.
I'll overrule that objection.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Was the Knox wedding the only wedding that you had affected by COVID-19?
I had many other couples whose weddings were also impacted by COVID-19, none of which had booked with the Nixon Lodge. Their venues were very understanding and either offered full refunds or to reschedule at no cost to the couple.
When did the plans for the Knox wedding start to pick back up?
Well, on June 5th, the governor released his guidelines for ceremony and reception capacities. We were happy with these, but on June 12th, the Nixon Lodge informed us of even further restrictions.
What restrictions did Nixon Lodge impose?
Well, where the state said we could only have 175 guests, they limited us even further to 75 guests. They also limited other aspects of the wedding, even going so far as to say that only the wedding couple could dance.
Could you describe any other changes in the wedding plans after the restrictions were imposed?
Well, we tried to reschedule with them, but they weren't willing to change any of the rules, and they even told us that if we were going to reschedule, there would be a $3,750 rescheduling fee, which wasn't outlined in the contract.
So what were your options for the wedding after the restrictions were imposed?
They gave us the ultimatum that we could either go forward with the wedding as planned with the current ridiculous restrictions, we could reschedule into October or well into 2021 and pay a $3,750 rescheduling fee, or we could cancel the wedding and they could keep all of the money the wedding couple had already paid in.
Your Honor, let the record reflect I am showing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as exhibit number 5B. May I approach the bench?
Yes.
May I approach the witness?
Yep.
Let the record reflect that I am now showing you what has been pre-marked as exhibit number 5B for identification. Could you identify this, please?
This was a wedding, this was an email from Chris Nixon to myself and the wedding couple.
And is this a fair and accurate representation?
Yes.
Your Honor, we would like to offer this piece of evidence into evidence at this time. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. Under Rule 408 and the Monet evidence, this is compromise or offers to compromise, therefore it is not allowed in court.
Your Honor, we are not using this to prove an attempt to compromise or to show compromisation between the two parties. We are simply using this exhibit to show the restrictions that were placed.
Overrule that. That's admitted.
Mr. Swain, what were the restrictions that were listed in this email?
Well, they said there would be a 75-person limit. They also said that they would, this 75-person limit and it being an outdoor wedding would incur additional costs.
And what did Nixon Lodge cite as the cause of the increased cost?
Well, they said they would need to obtain special permitting to serve drinks in the parking lot. They also said that there would be additional labor costs, but neither of these made sense as the wedding was already planned to be outdoors. They had told us we were not going to have our food and drink. They also said that there would only be 10 workers, so additional labor costs wouldn't make sense either.
What did the couple do in response to what was outlined in this email?
Well, we tried to work with the Nixon Lodge, but they weren't willing to negotiate, so they decided to sue and I stopped being involved.
And as a wedding planner, what is your experience with cancellations?
Well, whenever something major like this comes up, we try to work with both the couple and the venue and try to come to a conclusion that works for both parties. Yet in this case, the Nixon Lodge just wasn't willing to negotiate with us.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening.
Good evening.
So you run a successful business, correct?
Yes, I do.
And you said a wedding like Peyton Knox's could make or break your career, correct?
At this stage in my career, with only 1 year of being in the business, any wedding could make or break my career.
So you would be willing to do whatever it takes to make them happy and get a good review?
No, certainly not. But I would definitely be willing to put my best effort.
You stated that the couple was adamant about having 175 people at their wedding, correct?
Yes, this was what the state had said was safe, and we were ready to move forward with the 25% capacity.
But you understand in the preparedness plan how that would not work because the limit was 75 or 100 for outside weddings.
Frankly, I don't understand. They cited the reason as poor ventilation, but the wedding was always planned to be outside.
Yes, but the outdoor wedding cap was 100 people, correct?
I believe the wedding cap was 75 people.
And were you aware of all the emails that were in evidence today?
Yes, I was.
Can you please refer to Exhibit 5K?
Yes.
And can you follow along as I read this section in paragraph 2?
Objection, Your Honor. This exhibit was only allowed for permission to talk about the date, not the contents of the email.
Response?
Your Honor, this is for impeachment purposes as the witness has contradicted himself.
Yeah, I'll allow a very limited use for impeachment.
Thank you. Could you follow along as I read, starting as I and ending with people? I trust you can appreciate that. The most we can handle at this time is 100 people.
Yes, well, they said that, but they also said that they needed to check with the in-house caterer to ensure that they could accommodate an October 2020 wedding for more than 75 people. They had said that our wedding could only have 75 people, even though they could handle 100 people. They never told us our wedding could have 100 people.
Didn't this email directly say they could handle 100 people at this time?
It did, but they specifically said our wedding couldn't have
Moving on.
people, even though they could handle it.
Thank you. Moving on. You said you've never seen anybody use a force majeure clause before, correct?
That's correct.
Have you ever had a wedding altered by COVID-19 before this year?
No, but I don't think anybody has.
And have you ever had a pandemic occur before this year?
No one here has.
So you would say you have no experience with force majeure clauses.
Well, until this case came up, no.
And you said this rescheduling fee was ridiculous and not outlined in the contract at all, correct?
I didn't say at all, but the $3,750 was not outlined in the contract.
Can you please refer to Exhibit 2?
Yes.
Can you look at the top of page 53, the first paragraph, and follow along as I read? All fees, service charges, and disbursements occurred up until that time will be due and payable, including a cancellation fee of $3,750.
We never canceled the wedding. We rescheduled. And there's a whole other part of the contract that deals with rescheduling.
Wasn't this contract for the date of July 4th, correct?
That is true, but Chris Nixon seemed to be okay with us using the same contract when we rescheduled. He certainly gave us no other contract to sign, and never even talked about drawing up a new contract.
Were negotiations able to finish between the Nixon Lodge and Peyton Knox?
Well, we had talked about those new dates, and he seemed to be fine moving forward with the October date.
But didn't Peyton Knox cancel the contract before negotiations were able to finish between them parties?
We rescheduled. We didn't cancel the wedding.
So you're stating today that Peyton Knox did not cancel his wedding?
He canceled the wedding, but they had already said that the $3,750 fee was applicable before he canceled the wedding.
Would you say that food and dancing is very important to a wedding?
Certainly.
And you're happily married, correct?
Yes, I am.
Did you have dancing and food at your wedding?
I did.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Your Honor, this was brought up in his direct that he is married, and this has relevance, as you can see in my next question.
Your Honor, we never brought up his wedding in our direct.
I'm going to sustain that objection.
No further questions. Thank you.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Swain, could you please refer to page 6 of Exhibit 3 under social distancing?
Exhibit 3.
Yes.
What page?
Page 6 of the exhibit. Or excuse me, page 60,
Thank you.
under social distancing. Line 5, in the parentheses, it says events will have no more than 75 guests, correct?
Yes, it does.
And this is the official limit stated in the contract?
Yes, it was.
Thank you, no further questions.
Witnesses, if you... Plaintiff, do you have any more witnesses?
The plaintiff does, Your Honor.
All right. Defense counsel, are you prepared to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Tony Olivia to stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the rules of the mock trial competition? I do. You may not take a stand.
Evening. Can you please state your name and age for the court, spelling your last name, please?
Certainly. My name is Tony Olivia, Olivia, and I am 45 years old.
And what is your current occupation, Mr. Olivia?
I am currently employed at Nixon Lodge and Catering. I've worked there since 2010 and in 2017. I was given a promotion to lead venue planner.
And can you please explain any other previous work you've had before Nixon Lodge?
Certainly. Before I worked at Nixon Lodge, I worked as a paralegal for a small law firm in the Twin Cities for around 8 years.
And what exactly did this paralegal work entail?
Well, when I worked as a paralegal, our small firm dealt with just about anything you can imagine, from business disputes to employment. We did it all.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. The fact that Mr. Olivia is a paralegal adds no weight to the case or his testimony, and therefore is not relevant to the case at hand today.
Your Honor, I'm simply laying the foundation for this witness and also adding to his credibility.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, there's no foundation needs to be laid to his occupation as it adds no weight to the case, so it is therefore irrelevant in total.
I'm going to sustain that. I think we can move on.
Thank you. Mr. Olivia, when did you first meet Peyton Knox and Parker Stevenson?
I first met Peyton and Parker in June 2019 when they decided to book their wedding at Nixon Lodge.
And what was your first step in planning Peyton Knox and Parker Stevenson's wedding?
I first talked with them about their food and beverage. Nixon Lodge has a $15,000 minimum, but their beverage and food and beverage was well over $15,000 and ended up around $36,724. Half of that was paid up front, which was $18,362.
And did any member of the Knox party ever pay the second half of the food and beverage fee?
They did not ever pay that second half. Even though it was clearly outlined, they didn't.
And Mr. Olivia, we all know what happened in March of 2020, but can you tell us what specifically happened to Nixon Lodge in March of 2020?
March of 2020 is when Nixon Lodge first really felt the effects of COVID-19. At that point, a lot about the virus was still unknown, and with Governor Walz's executive order, we were forced to shut down. Fortunately, in June, we were allowed to reopen, but there were still some restrictions.
And what exactly did these restrictions entail?
Well, initially, we were told that we couldn't have more than 75 guests at an event, and we had social distance.
Now, Mr. Olivia, if you could please refer to Exhibit 3, specifically page 60. And if you could read the second sentence under the social distancing heading, please.
In accordance with the Hibbing Health Inspector's recommendation, due to the age and layout of the Nixon Lodge and its ventilation system, no indoor gatherings will exceed 85 people, including staff and workers. Events will have no more than 75 guests.
And based on that information, was it Nixon Lodge's decision to limit the guest count to 75 persons?
No, it was not. It was a recommendation of the Hibbing's Health Inspector and therefore enforced by the state.
And how did other clients, not including the Knoxes, react to Nixon Lodge's restrictions?
Other guests had their weddings, and although they seemed upset at first, they understood that there was a reason these restrictions were put into place and had their weddings and seemed satisfied with the accommodations we put forth.
And how did the Knoxes react to Nixon Lodge's restrictions?
The Knoxes, however, didn't seem to understand why we put these restrictions in place. We were just trying to keep everyone safe, and it made it seem like we had complete control over the situation, when in fact we had almost no control.
Improper character evidence.
Want to elaborate?
Yes, Your Honor. The testimony that Mr. Olivia is giving is attacking the credibility of the Knox party here and claiming things that they never said or even mentioned in their directs.
Yes, Your Honor. Based on reactions in emails and testimonies, the witnesses were clearly upset with Nixon Lodge's restrictions, which is what Mr. Olivia here is testifying to.
May I respond?
Briefly.
Your Honor, inferences are not allowed in a court of law.
Yeah, the witness can respond as to what was factually relayed back and forth, but can't express any characterization of how those messages were given or received.
Your Honor, did you overrule or sustain the objection? Sorry.
I sort of modified your question a little bit. He can answer the question, but it's limited to the factual exchanges, not his opinion or his impression of those exchanges.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Olivia, force majeure can be kind of a tricky subject and hard for many to understand. Can you please explain it better for all of us?
Certainly. I put the force majeure clause into the contract for a situation exactly like this. So when there is a situation completely out of our hands, like COVID-19 or government restrictions, we would not be held liable.
And was there anything you could have done to better accommodate the Knox's wedding?
I truly believe there's nothing more we could have done. With the government orders, COVID-19 restrictions in place, I believe Nixon Lodge put forth every accommodation that we could to better their wedding.
Thank you. No further questions, gentlemen.
Any cross-examination?
Good evening, Mr. Olivia.
Good evening.
Now, Mr. Olivia, could you show me the report of the Hibbing Health Inspector that says you are only allowed to have 75 guests in your building?
No, I cannot. That is not part of the evidence, but I can assure you I'm under oath and I can elaborate based on the report of the health inspector.
Mr. Olivia, do couples looking at Nixon Lodge receive a brochure when they are interested?
They do receive a brochure, yes.
Your Honor, let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 1. May I approach the bench?
Yes.
May I approach the witness? I'm now getting what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 1 for identification purposes. Could you identify this document, please?
Yes, these are excerpts from our wedding brochure.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of this brochure and the excerpts from it?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 1 into evidence at this time. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Exhibit 1 is received.
Mr. Olivia, in this brochure it says that facilities can seat up to 750 people, correct?
At that time, they could hold up to 750 people.
Was the Knox party allowed their desired number of guests?
Unfortunately, that was out of our control, so they were not allowed the 750 people that was initially thought.
Mr. Knox, this brochure also promises full catering, bar, and other meal services, yes?
Again, this brochure was before COVID-19 had happened, and although this would be relevant to weddings before COVID-19, it would not be relevant in this case.
Mr. Olivia, this brochure and the excerpts from it do promise full catering, bar, and other meal services, though, yes?
Yes, they do, but again, this was before COVID-19.
Thank you. Was the Knox party allowed to have any of their food options, beverages, or other meal services for their wedding?
Unfortunately, they were not.
Thank you. And was this decision made by Nixon Lodge, or was it made by the Minnesota Department of Health?
This decision was made by Nixon Lodge, just try to keep everyone safe.
Thank you. Now, this brochure also, does this brochure mention anything about a ventilation system or a faulty ventilation system at that?
No, it does not.
And have any of your previous weddings been affected by your faulty ventilation system?
No, this really only came into play when COVID-19 was made relevant, so we didn't feel it would be necessary to put in our brochure because at that point it wasn't a problem.
Sticking with the ventilation system, were you aware that the Knox party wedding was going to be held outdoors?
It was planned to be held outdoors, but in case of inclement weather, we had to make sure that we had an optional area that they could go.
Ventilation wouldn't affect an outdoor wedding though, would it?
I never said it would.
And the amount of people inside at one time could have been able to be regulated for their outdoor wedding, couldn't it?
I'm sorry, can you please restate the question?
The amount of people inside of Nixon Lodge could have been regulated during the Knox party wedding, couldn't?
I would suppose so, yes.
Thank you. Now, are you aware that Nixon Lodge limited their workers to only 10 workers at one time?
Yes, Nixon Lodge didn't feel it would be safe to have any more than 10 workers. And at that point, we had a lot of elderly workers that they didn't feel comfortable working at that point in time.
And this decision was made by Nixon Lodge, correct?
This decision was made by Nixon Lodge.
Along with all of this, only Mr. Knox and Ms. Stevenson were allowed to dance at their wedding, correct?
That is true.
And was this decision made by Nixon Lodge, or was this made by the Minnesota Department of Health?
this restriction was made by Nixon Lodge. Although dancing could have been acceptable, it would have to be 6 feet apart, and at that point, it's just asking for problems. We didn't want to be in trouble with the state.
Could you please refer to Exhibit 1?
Yes.
The pictures in this exhibit are of Nixon Lodge, correct?
Yes, they are.
Now, looking at the top picture, Nixon Lodge is a large venue, yes?
It is a very large venue, that is correct.
And it can hold 750 people, yes?
In normal circumstances, that would be the case.
Thank you. Now, in your affidavit, you state that you didn't believe that you could maintain social distancing with 75 people in a space that can hold up to 750 people?
That is true, but that was based off the recommendation of the Hibbings Health Inspector, so that was really not my decision. It was recommended by the Hibbings Health Inspector, and therefore, it was part of Minnesota Department of Health guidelines.
Now, all these changes made by Nixon Lodge are modifications, correct?
They would be considered modifications, but they were out of our hands.
Thank you. Now, could you please refer to Exhibit 2, Section 6, subsection modifications on page 53. Now, please follow along with me as I read starting at any. Any modification or amendment to this agreement requires the mutual consent of the parties and must be made in writing and signed by all parties. Did I read that correctly?
You read that correctly.
Now, did Nixon Lodge agree with the modifications that you made?
Yes, Nixon Lodge put those modifications in place.
Excuse me, did the Knox Party agree with the modifications that Nixon Lodge made?
They weren't, but in exhibit...
Thank you. And did the Knox Party...
As a witness, opposing counsel did not allow my witness to finish his testimony.
Let him answer the question, but the answer has to be restrained to the question that's asked.
Would you like me to restate the question?
You may restate the question, please.
Did the Knox Party agree to the modifications made by Nixon Lodge during the pandemic?
Although they may not have agreed with them, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case.
Objection, Your Honor. Non-responsive witness.
You've answered the question.
Thank you. Now, did the Knox Party ever sign a paper agreeing to the modifications that were made by Nixon Lodge?
They did not sign a paper agreeing with these modifications.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Olivia, if you could redirect your attention to Exhibit 1, please. Can you please read the first sentence at the top of this exhibit?
Excerpts from Nixon Lodge wedding brochure.
So this is not the entire Nixon Lodge wedding brochure, is it?
No, it is not. It's simply
So it's
excerpts.
entirely possible that elsewhere in the brochure...
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation.
Your Honor, this witness is the lead venue planner for Nixon Lodge, and as such, he would have knowledge as to what the contents of the rest of the wedding brochure are.
I'm going to sustain that. I think anything outside of what's in the exhibit would be beyond the scope.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Witness is excused. Call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Bobby Stewart to the stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the rules of the mock trial competition? You may now take your stand.
Please state your name for the court, spelling of the last name.
My name is Bobby Stewart, S-T-U-A-R-T.
Ms. Stewart, what is your current occupation?
I am currently the catering manager for Nixon Lodge and Catering.
Do you have any educational background?
I attended a local community college where I earned a business degree, so I'm a caterer.
Could you describe what previous experience you have in the catering industry?
Well, I mean, I've always been around food as my parents were very foodie. In fact, my first job was a line cook at a restaurant that no longer exists. After I graduated, I was lower management for a local competitor catering business.
Ms. Stewart, what is your relationship to Chris Nixon?
I met Chris Nixon right after I graduated. He was looking for a banquet manager, so I pitched my idea of offering wedding guests a particular food or drink that meant something to the couple. Chris saw the value in my idea and hired me to work for Nixon Lodge and Catering.
Moving on, how has your line of work been directly affected by the pandemic?
Like many other business owners, I have been hit extremely hard by the pandemic. I mean, I haven't been able to do what I love, which is catering. In fact, Chris Nixon and I have had to make some really tough choices to stay in business.
Could you describe for the court what running a banquet service entails?
We work with the venue, the wedding clients, and often their wedding planner to draw up a BEO. The couple then chooses which wedding package they would like, and next comes the fun part, where I get to choose. The couple gets to choose which specialty item they would like to include. Finally, I meet with the couple for food tastings, and I begin to order.
And what is included in a BEO?
The BEO includes the table linens, napkins, chair coverings, food and drink options, etc. The final expected cost, based on those items, is then calculated for the agreement. Finally, I factor out the down payment, which is typically 50% plus 100% for specialty items such as truffles.
How far in advance must you order standard food and drinks for an event such as a wedding?
I order most standard wedding trappings about 48 hours ahead of the event. I then order the food and drinks about a week before the event. In addition to those, I also order the specialty item for the couple.
What difference is there when ordering the specialty items?
Specialty items can take weeks or even months to get, so I have to order those far in advance. They take time and effort, and certainly not cheap, but it truly adds a new dimension to the wedding. Typically, a specialty item chosen by the couple would be considered a PHF product.
What is a PHF product?
PHF products are potentially hazardous foods that can support the rapid growth of bacteria when not stored properly. There are foods such as chicken or salmon. I mean, I would consider that fresh truffles are a PHF. At times, these PHF products can cause serious complications.
Could you describe some of these complications?
Well, once you receive a delivery for a PHF product, they cannot be returned to the distributor because of their short shelf life.
What made Peyton and Parker's wedding different from a standard wedding?
First of all, they chose the high-end gold wedding package, as well as ordered fresh truffles from southern France. So overall, their wedding was just extremely expensive.
Could you describe what went into ordering the black truffles?
I ordered the truffles 90 days in advance from a small farm in southern France. I did have to pay for them up front, which cost $8,000 for the truffles themselves, plus another $1,000 for labor and service costs.
After finding out that many weddings were canceled, what efforts were made on your end?
Well, I was able to cut some of our losses by canceling deliveries on a rolling basis as weddings were canceled. However, these specialty items were a different story. I mean, I was left with a cache of specialty items with no weddings to serve them at. Fortunately, some of them were shelf-stable or non-PHF, but others, like the truffles, were a PHF product, so the distributor wouldn't take them back.
Once the pandemic hit, did you hear a response from the Knox party regarding their future wedding plans?
When I ordered the truffles back in April of 2020, I had not heard from their wedding planner, and they had not canceled their wedding yet. I mean, in fact, places started opening back up in June, so I thought their wedding would move forward.
After the restrictions were put into place by Nixon Lodge and Catering, what efforts were made on your end?
I understand that changing the wedding size to 75 really changes the wedding. But I say, think of our employees. They tried to work through everything, but some of them had to go home and take care of their children, while others just didn't feel comfortable serving people face to face. In the end, I just didn't find enough help.
What did you end up doing with the Knox party's specialty truffles?
I was approached by another couple who were interested in buying them from me. However, I did decline. I did take a pound home for myself, but that was a personal choice. I just felt like it would be extremely irresponsible of me to ship those with anyone else. I mean, if someone were to eat these and get sick from them, Nixon Lodge and I would be liable for that.
Did you return any part of the down payment to the family after finding out that they had officially canceled the wedding?
I do not think it would be fair to return any part of the down payment. They agreed to put down the money so I could ensure that their wedding had food, service, beverage, and that one specialty item. I could not anticipate COVID-19. I mean, I upheld my part of the bargain. I feel bad for them, but in the end, a deal is a deal.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Ms. Stewart. You stated you're the catering manager for the Nixon Lodge, correct?
Yes, I am.
And as the catering manager, you're employed by Chris Nixon.
Yes, he is hired me.
Now, has Chris Nixon informed you of all active COVID protocols at the Nixon Lodge?
Those mainly regarding the catering services, but I have a general idea of other services.
Let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel it has been pre-marked as Exhibit 5B. May I approach the bench?
You may.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
I'm now showing you what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 5B. Can you identify what this exhibit is?
Yes, this is an email from Chris Nixon sent to Peyton Knox.
And this email was sent by Chris Nixon?
Yes, it was.
Your Honor, I ask that Exhibit 5B be entered into evidence. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. We object to Rule Number 408 under compromise.
What is the purpose you're seeking to admit this for?
Your Honor, I would only ask this witness to testify to this email as it pertains to the ongoing COVID protocols at the Nixon Lodge.
I'll overrule that objection and allow that.
Now, Ms. Nixon, Ms. Stewart, would you follow along as I read from paragraph 3, beginning with "we will" and the options? We will have to cancel any shared hors d'oeuvres and served dinner options. Now, Ms. Stewart, are you aware that these shared hors d'oeuvres and shared dinner options constituted all of the food that was being served at this wedding?
Yes, I am.
And you state that a down payment is required so that you can ensure that the couple will have the food options they paid for?
They agreed to put down the down payment.
But you're choosing to retain this payment even though you're not providing any of these options?
Well, they did not put down the other half of their payment, and they agreed to this before COVID, so they just couldn't comply without the help to serve all these guests.
But you weren't providing any of these food options, were you?
Not after COVID, we could not.
But you still believe they should have to pay for these options?
We did not ask for them to pay until after they sued.
Now, if you could refer back to Exhibit 5B, can you tell the court when this email was sent?
This email was sent on June 2nd, 2020 at 10:07 a.m.
And when was this wedding originally scheduled to be held?
It was originally scheduled to be held on July 4th, 2020.
So this email was sent over a month before the wedding?
It was, yes.
So you knew a month before the wedding date that there would be no food served at the ceremony?
Like I said previously, I have to order specialty items far in advance.
Let's talk about standard food and drink options first. You order these options typically a week before each wedding, right?
Yes, I do.
So you would have had more than enough time to cancel these orders for standard items?
Well, I had to get everything lined up beforehand, and they did not put down the other money anyways.
But you only ordered these items a week before each wedding, right?
I do typically, yes.
So you wouldn't have even ordered the standard wedding items yet, would you?
Well, I still had to line them up and make sure that the people preparing the food had enough time to make sure they had enough employees to get us food.
But you don't pay for these food options until you order them, do you?
Well, they had to put down the money as they signed a new contract.
But you wouldn't have paid for these food options yet, would you have?
They had not, no.
Now, let's focus on specialty items. Do you remember when you ordered the truffles for this wedding ceremony?
I ordered the truffles back in April of 2020.
Did you contact the couple or your employer, Chris Nixon, before ordering these truffles?
Well, like I said previously, places started opening back up in June, so I thought the wedding would move forward.
But you never contacted the wedding couple or Chris Nixon?
They never contacted me either, and I just deal with the food. Chris Nixon dealt with most of the emailing and contacting, so I think that if there was something very important, he would have contacted me about it regarding catering services.
But it is your job as the catering manager to discuss with the couple their catering options, isn't it?
It is my job to ensure that I can do my best part to make sure that there's food, beverage, and that one specialty item at the wedding.
Now, as you stated, truffles aren't shelf stable, correct?
No, they are not. They are considered a VHF product.
So you ordered these truffles which aren't shelf stable 90 days before the wedding, but didn't think to contact the wedding couple about the status of their wedding?
I had to make sure that I could ensure that and uphold my part of the bargain that I was going to have these truffles at the wedding.
Now, is it true that the Knox family paid for these truffles?
They did have to pay for 100% of the specialty item, yes.
But in the end, the Knox family never got the truffles they paid for, did they?
It would be extremely irresponsible of me to share them with them because they are a VHF product. I mean, they could have gotten sick and Nixon Lodge and I would have been liable for that.
But you did get to take a pound home of truffles for yourself, didn't you?
This was an extremely personal choice. After the fact that the wedding would have been canceled and I would have had to just throw them all away.
Did you pay for these truffles?
I did not.
So you ate a pound of truffles that were paid for by the Knox family and you didn't think to reimburse them or the Nixon Lodge for this expense?
Like I said, either the garbage or, I thought that I could put a little bit of it to use rather than throwing $8,000 worth of food away.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Stewart, did the Knoxes ever pay the other half of the food and beverage fee?
They did not, no.
Was this fee included in the contract?
Yes, it was.
And would it have been possible to have the food at the October date?
With accommodating 100 people, we did offer to have food at the wedding. We did not know what it would look like in October.
Objection, Your Honor. Facts not in evidence.
How?
Your Honor, this email is not in evidence.
Response?
Your Honor, I am not referring to an email.
Oh,
Would you like me to restate the question?
Yes, please.
Would it have been possible to have food at the October date?
We did say that we could accommodate for 100 people at the October date with food and beverages.
And lastly, the wedding was not canceled when you ordered the black truffles, was it?
No, I ordered the black truffles far in advance from when they had canceled for them.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Richfield. Call your next witness.
The defense calls Chris Nixon to the stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
You may not take the stand.
Good evening. Can you please state your name and age for the court?
My name is Chris Nixon, and I am 30 years old.
And what is your educational background?
I graduated from Hibbing High School in 2008, and then I attended the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis, where I received my Bachelor of Arts degree in marketing.
And what is your occupational history leading up to working at Nixon Lodge?
Right out of college, I got a job working at an event center in Fergus Falls. I worked there until 2016, when I was then hired into the sales department at Nixon Lodge.
And why did you end up leaving this job at Fergus Falls?
I decided it was time for something new, along with some false accusations and poor management. Working at the event center really helped me decide that this was the kind of business I wanted to devote my life to.
And how is your current job at Nixon Lodge?
In 2018, I became the sales manager for Nixon Lodge, and as of January 1st, 2019, I became the proud owner of Nixon Lodge. Now, this job really means a lot to me. This business has been in my family since the 50s.
And when did you first meet Peyton Knox?
I first met Peyton Knox in March of 2019 when he expressed interest in booking Nixon Lodge for his wedding. We set up a tour for June of 2019, and Peyton and Parker ended up signing a contract booking Nixon Lodge for July 4th, 2020 for their wedding, a very highly demanded date.
And why is this contract being called into question today?
About a year after this contract was signed, the COVID-19 pandemic began. At Nixon Lodge, we've been trying to stick to contracts as much as we possibly can among the government restrictions and other challenges. However, the Knoxes seem to believe that this contract no longer needs to be followed.
And how has COVID affected your business overall?
At event centers, budgets are already tight. Only about 5% of the revenue we receive is profitable.
And what precautions have you put into place because of COVID-19?
Before we could make any changes, we were shut down by Governor Walz's executive order until June of 2016. When we were able to reopen, we were only able to reopen at 25% of our previous 700 capacity. We did get a second opinion from University of Minnesota scientists, as well as the Hibbing City building inspector, and it was requested that we had a 75 guest limit due to our poor ventilation systems from the 70s.
And why did you prepare your own preparedness plan?
Preparedness plans are not a one-size-fits-all. The Minnesota State Preparedness Plan actually states that each individual venue needed to have its own specific COVID-19 preparedness plan. It also states that proper ventilation protocols need to be followed.
And how did you inform your clients about these changes?
On June 1st of 2020, I sent out an email to everyone who had booked an event with Nixon Lodge through the end of 2020. This informed guests of the new restrictions, as well as the 75 guest limit. I also attached a copy of the Minnesota Department of Health rules and guidelines, as well as the Nixon Lodge preparedness plan.
And how did Peyton Knox respond to these emails?
Peyton Knox's response made me question as if he had even read my previous email. Peyton Knox contacted me the next day, expecting an expectation to be made just for him. His response was seeming to ask if he could have 250 or more guests at his wedding. It was like he hadn't even read my previous email, but expected an expectation to be made just for him.
What, if any, other suggestions were given?
I suggested rescheduling, moving the wedding outdoors. One rescheduled date possibility was October 23rd of 2020 for a rescheduling fee of $3,750.
And why was there this rescheduling fee?
At the beginning of all this, we decided to implement a rescheduling fee of $3,750 to help limit the countless reschedulings we were being forced to accommodate.
And why did you choose this $375,000?
We could have charged a lot more than $3,750, as July 4th is a very highly demanded date, and we were actually losing about $50,000 from the Knox's wedding. However, this was the fee that was in the contract, so we did decide to stick to it.
And where can you find this fee in the contract?
You can find this fee under the section of cancellations, as it does involve canceling the original contract for the original date and creating an entire new contract for the new date.
And what agreements, if any, did yourself and Peyton Knox come to?
We did not seem to reach any agreement. After the last email, Peyton Knox seemed to blow up and refused to work with me beyond that point.
Let the record reflect on joint opposing counsel would have been pre-marked as Exhibit 5N. May I approach the bench?
Yes.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Can you please identify this document?
This is an email between Peyton Knox and myself.
And does this seem to be a fair and accurate representation of this exhibit?
Yes.
I now enter what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 5N into evidence its authenticity has been stipulated.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Exhibit 5M is received.
Can you please read this email?
This email reads, "We're canceling."
And what is significant about this?
This email is technically a request for a cancellation in writing. However, it is yet to be signed by both of the parties, so therefore the contract will still need to be upheld.
And what does the contract say about cancellations?
The contract states that Nixon Lodge is not legally obligated to offer a refund. However, we did offer a refund.
And why did Nixon Lodge offer this refund if it wasn't in the contract?
Peyton Knox was threatening to sue. We know that planning a wedding is stressful even not during a pandemic. So we did decide to offer a refund of $4,535 of the original $6,695 Mr. Knox paid. However, we were not able to offer a full refund due to the money that had already been put into the wedding.
And what is a force majeure clause?
A force majeure clause states that when things are changed for reasons outside of our control, we are no longer liable for those changes, as long as reasonable efforts have been made.
And what efforts did you make?
We suggested rescheduling, possibly moving the wedding outdoors, and trying to do everything we could to make sure this wedding could run smoothly.
And why would these efforts be considered reasonable to your specific business?
These were efforts that were not included in the contract.
Objection, Your Honor, opinion by a lay witness. This witness is not an expert witness and therefore cannot testify to whether these were reasonable actions or not.
Your Honor, she is saying why she would consider these efforts to be reasonable as she had to follow the force majeure clause and make a ruling on whether or not she would be reasonable.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yeah.
This witness is testifying to her personal opinion on it and therefore it is not admissible.
I'll sustain that.
Next question. Why did you offer these efforts to Peyton Knox?
We offer these efforts, as like I stated before, we know that planning a wedding is very stressful, even when it's not during a pandemic. We wanted to do everything we could to make sure that they could have their wedding and run smoothly.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. You previously worked at an event center in Fergus Falls, correct?
Yes, right after I got out of college, I worked at an event center in Fergus Falls until 2016.
And you resigned from that job, didn't you?
Yes, that is correct.
But if you hadn't resigned, you would have been fired for taking more.
Objection, Your Honor, relevant.
Your Honor, this is relevant to the case as it deals with the credibility of the witness with handling sales.
Your Honor, this case is about the force majeure clause and the cancellation, not about her previous work experience.
Credibility is relevant. I'll overrule that.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes.
So you would have been fired from this job for taking more credits for sales than you actually earned, correct?
Those were the accusations, but I just decided it was time for something new.
But is that a yes or no to my previous question?
I suppose it would be a yes.
Now, you failed to contact the Knox family about your plans in regards to the pandemic in March, didn't you?
We did not contact them in March as many things were still yet unknown about the pandemic.
And you didn't contact them in April either, did you?
Again, many things were still unknown about the pandemic and whether or not we would be able to reopen in time for their wedding.
And you failed to contact them in May as well.
Yes, we did. Like I said, many things have been unknown about the pandemic.
You'd never informed them until June 1st about your plans regarding the wedding, just 30 days before their scheduled wedding, correct?
Yes, we sent out an email on June 1st of 2020 informing all of our clients about our new restrictions.
So the state restricted the maximum capacity to 25%, which is also 175 people, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And the Living City Building Inspector further made a recommendation to further decrease this capacity to 75 people, correct?
Yes, we decided to get a second opinion from University of Minnesota scientists as well as the Living City Building Inspector. And they advised us to limit our guests to 75 people due to our poor ventilation systems that were from the 70s.
So being that the wedding, this, as you previously stated, was for an old ventilation system, but the wedding was originally planned to be outside, correct?
Yes, it was. However,
And they never actually looked at the actual building, considering all of the inspection was done over Zoom, correct?
yes, but the Living City Building Inspector had been to Nixon Lodge before.
But not during the inspection.
Not this year, but it had been before.
And so as you previously stated, the max capacity was restricted to 75 guests, correct?
Yes, that was advised to us with our old ventilation systems.
Could you refer to Exhibit 5E, please. So this email states that labor will increase for serving food and beverages, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And Nixon Lodge, it also states that Nixon Lodge will need special permits to serve these beverages.
I believe so.
Yet Nixon Lodge had previously stated that they were canceling all food and beverage services, didn't they?
Yes, we did decide that it would be best to cancel all of those just to ensure the safety of both the guests and the employees.
And you also communicated that this would still incur additional costs.
Yes.
So, you also decreased the, on top of taking away their food and beverage services, you also decreased the guest list, correct?
Yes, we did. That was to ensure the safety of our clients and our employees.
And you also limited the dancing so only the wedding couple could dance, correct?
Yes, we decided it would be best to limit to just the wedding couple in order to provide safety measures for both our employees and the other attendees at the wedding.
Now, could you refer to Exhibit 2, please? Specifically, page 55 under the material event changes. And could you read in the third line, starting at the word if to the finish of the paragraph?
If Nixon Lodge Catering cannot accommodate a material event change, Nixon Catering may, at Nixon Catering's sole option, terminate this agreement on provision of written notice to the couple. If Nixon Lodge Catering can accommodate a material event change, but only by providing services in addition to the services, these additional services and any associated costs will be determined and agreed to by the parties at the time of that material event change.
So this exhibit states that Nixon Lodge must provide additional services in order to incur additional costs, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions. Yes, Your Honor.
Were you ever contacted by the Knoxes before June?
No, I was not.
Can you please refer to Exhibit 5E? Can you follow along as I read? Any outdoor wedding for more than 75 people will necessarily incur additional costs. Because we will need to use the parking lot, potentially the neighboring roads, you will need to obtain special permitting to allow for drinks past our premises. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So for a normal wedding, would you have to be using these neighboring roads?
No, we would not.
So because it's a special COVID-19 wedding, that's why you need a special permit?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Witnesses excused.
The defense rests, Your Honor.
Are we ready for our closing?
The plaintiff, or actually the plaintiff would like 2 minutes to prepare.
Okay.
The plaintiff is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
All right, ready.
May it please the court, opposing counsel Council, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Today you have heard the case of Peyton Knox versus Nixon Lodging Catering. Today you have heard the case of a couple who had their dream wedding reasonable accommodations and that there was nothing else that they could have done. But this is simply not true. The defense based what was easier for them rather than doing what was right. Nixon Lodge went beyond the state guidelines, ultimately allowing less than they could have. They wouldn't compromise because they wanted to do what was easier for them instead of doing what was best for both sides. Today, the defense has proven three elements beyond a preponderance of the evidence. First, we've proven that a contract was formed. Second, we've proven performance by the plaintiff of any conditions precedent to his right to demand performance by the plaintiff. And third, we've proven that the defendant has breached the contract. Now, in order for a party to prevail on a breach of contract claim, it must prove that it suffered losses, which the plaintiff has done with the testimony of our three witnesses. The first witness that you heard from the plaintiff was Peyton Knox himself, one half of a happy couple, at least what should have been a happy couple. As we all know, the July 4th date was one of the most important elements to the Knox family about their wedding. They couldn't have that. They were expecting around 250 guests at their wedding. They couldn't have that either. They paid for half of their food and beverage fees, and those services ended up getting canceled. The pandemic caused enough complications with the Knox family wedding, but where the defense went wrong was by going beyond the state guidelines and not making even the slightest accommodations with the wedding couple. Nixon Lodge wouldn't consider any of the negotiation ideas from the Knox family, ultimately not meeting them halfway. Nixon Lodge even went as far to restrict the dancing so that only the wedding couple could dance, which was nowhere to be found in the state guidelines. Nixon Lodge took the happiest day away from Peyton and Parker and tried to make them pay for it. The next witness that you heard from was Jordan Knox, who has stated that this was a way for the Knoxes to give back to their friends, family, and customers for all the weddings that they had been invited to. Now, as a former business owner, Ms. Knox has put her business experience into perspective today. She may not be in the wedding planning business, but she has shown that a business is a business and that the needs of the customers should always be taken into consideration. Nixon Lodge has only done what's best for them. The final witness from the plaintiff that you heard from today was Riley Swain, who is widely experienced in this field of work. Mr. Swain has put forth his best efforts to make this wedding as special as possible for the Knox family, something that the defense has managed to counteract. He has testified that unlike Nixon Lodge, all of the other venues have tried to make accommodations with their clients, and that Nixon Lodge should be held liable for their actions. In the cross of Bobby Stewart, we have further shown the unprofessionalism of Nixon Lodge. Ms. Stewart took home an entire pound of truffles without even contacting the Knox family or offering to reimburse them. Nixon Lodge had the truffles. The Knox family had paid for them, and Nixon Lodge was just going to throw them away, but not before Ms. Stewart decided to take home an entire pound for her own selfish desires. This is just one more example of how Nixon Lodge has no regards for their clients and only cares about what's best for them and how they can benefit. It has been made even more clear with the testimony of Tony Olivia that the wedding couple wasn't going to have any of the original elements of their wedding. They weren't allowed to have the July 4th date. They were only allowed to have 75 guests instead of 175. They canceled all drink and dinner options and expected the Knox family to pay for it in full despite the circumstances, and they weren't allowed to let their guests dance at their wedding, which was nowhere to be found in the state guidelines. When this was all said and done, Nixon Lodge tried to make the Knox family pay for elements of their wedding that they weren't even allowed to have. Yet they had thought that they had made reasonable accommodations. Not to mention that it was Nixon Lodge's decision to decrease the amount of workers at the wedding to 10 people. Nixon Lodge breached the contract in more than one way. They weren't reasonable by making modifications without approval from the Knox family as well. With the cross of Chris Nixon, we have proven that Nixon Lodge was out of line with the contract. Not only did Nixon Lodge wait until June 1st to contact the Knox family, but they blamed the Knoxes for not reaching out to them when it is NLC's duty and responsibility to contact their clients. Nixon Lodge claims that they had no choice but to decrease the max capacity to 75 people because of a recommendation for the ventilation system. But how can they make a recommendation when they never even looked at the actual building? To make matters worse, they can't even give us the official report that led them to this conclusion. But in the end, the ventilation system shouldn't be a problem considering the original wedding was planned to be outside. On top of that, Nixon Lodge took away services and expected the Knox family to pay for said services. It has become clear that Nixon Lodge is making the Knox family suffer for something that was out of their control. The defense has tried to say that the Knox family overreacted and that there was nothing else that they could do, but this is simply not true. Not only did Nixon Lodge take away food services, guest mingling, and guest numbers, but they tried to charge more for it. Because of the pandemic, the Knoxes had their dream wedding ripped out from underneath them, and instead of being compassionate and understanding, Nixon Lodge decided to take the easy route out. The defense has tried to say that the Knoxes couldn't see the reality, but in reality, Nixon Lodge was unreasonable and Peyton Knox was justifiably upset. Nixon Lodge couldn't control the pandemic, but they could control how they reacted to it. And they decided to do what was best for them and them only, instead of doing what was right. The plaintiff thanks you for your time today, and we ask that you rule in our favor. Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, opposing counsel, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Today you've heard the case of Peyton Knox versus Nixon Lodge and Catering, a case that is based on a lack of empathy by the Knoxes who believe that their wedding was more important than people's lives, and were faced with the fact that just because they believe the world revolves around them, it doesn't, and they have to follow rules just like everyone else. They couldn't see the reality. Their reality was clouded by the emotion of not having the perfect wedding on the perfect day, and to do what is right by everyone involved. And through this emotion, they couldn't see that Nixon Lodge was trying their best to be reasonable in accordance with the force majeure clause. Now, our first witness today was Tony Olivia, and Tony Olivia was there firsthand to experience how the Knoxes broke their side of the contract by not paying half the food and beverage bill by the due date. He will also explain how NOC was reasonable, and they did not ask for any of this money until the Knoxes decided to sue. He attempted to work with the Knoxes, but nothing was good enough for this self-proclaimed local celebrity. Now our next witness today was Bobby Stewart. Now Bobby Stewart tried to make sure that the Knoxes had everything they could for their wedding, including $8,000 shuffles imported from France. Now, unfortunately, because of regulations and the changing wedding dates, they're not able to have these truffles at their wedding. They're either be thrown away because they're a PHF product. So they could not be returned to the distributor, and they could not be sold to an outside source like the Knoxes or to another wedding couple, because if they would have consumed these and something would have happened, NOC would have been held liable for this. Now our last witness was Chris Nixon. Chris Nixon worked for months towards an impossible goal, trying to satisfy Peyton Knox. Every idea was shot down. The refund wouldn't work because it wasn't enough for him. Even though the contract is clear that when a cancellation happens, no refund is to be awarded. The rescheduling date wouldn't work because he didn't want to have to pay the fee that was specifically outlined in the contract. And because the wedding could have been held on July 4th, even offering this new date was outside the contract. Now the plaintiff's first witness was the plaintiff himself, Peyton Knox. Now, as an only child and a gifted athlete, Peyton Knox has lived a very sheltered life. Now he's also never had to run a business, so he doesn't know what it's like to have to care for the well-being of employees and customers. And this showed when he was willing to infect his entire wedding with COVID-19, simply because he wanted to ignore the state's imposed orders to dance. Now, Peyton Knox also abruptly canceled a $75,000 wedding in a 3-word email and refused any further negotiations. Peyton Knox showed just how selfish he can be today. Now their next witness was Jordan Knox. Now Jordan Knox likes to think that by owning a clothing store, she knows the contract of an event center. Now, Jordan Knox is a protective parent, and she was upset to learn that her son would not have the perfect wedding that he envisioned. And she misdirected her anger
towards the Nixon Lodge, when it really should have been towards the real source, COVID-19. Now, this was because her emotions were clouded. Now, their last witness, Riley Swain. He has built a business off of referrals, and a bad review could break his business. And a bad review for someone as influential as Peyton Knox could be detrimental to his business. And Riley Swain today didn't even know the capacity that Nixon Lodge could handle. And as a wedding planner, that is his job. Now, hundreds of businesses have been closed down due to COVID-19. And customers like Peyton Knox have been taking advantage of these businesses and the situation that they're put in. And Nixon Lodge will not allow the business that has been in their family for generations to go bankrupt, simply because Peyton Knox does not want to follow state-imposed guidelines. Now, the plaintiff today needed to prove beyond the preponderance of the evidence 2 elements. First, that Nixon Lodge broke their contract. And secondly, that the force majeure clause did not excuse Nixon Lodge from performing the contract. Now, starting with the cancellation. Nixon Lodge did not break their side of the contract because they offered 4 separate different ways to be reasonable. First, they offered a refund, which was nowhere in the contract. Secondly, they offered a rescheduling date, which, because the wedding could have been held on July 4th, again, was not in the contract. And secondly, a wedding with a capacity of 100 people was offered to be held outside. And thirdly, they were offered a break on the money that they failed to pay, which was also outlined in the contract, which is a breach on Peyton Knox's part of the contract. But Nixon Lodge was reasonable, and they didn't ask for any of this money they were owed until the Knoxes decided to sue. Now lastly, we have shown today how Peyton Knox has broken his side of the contract by not paying half the food and beverage owed by the due date, and by canceling the wedding, which is a direct breach of the contract. We ask that you rule in favor of the defense. Thank you.
Now, is there any time left for rebuttal? I think so. Do you have any?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense has tried to prove their case by slandering our witnesses, and not by establishing facts here tonight. COVID-19 may have unpended the Knox's wedding plans, but it was Nixon Lodge's refusal to compromise that made it impossible to accommodate a new and safer wedding. Once again, the plaintiff thanks you for your time today, and we ask that you rule in our favor.
All right. Well, that concludes the trial. Give them all a round of applause. Just a couple of things I'll say. First of all, they do a great job. You can tell they argue objections like they don't even like each other. I hate to see them against opponents that aren't their teammates and friends. So, very, very good job of addressing the right issues and those types of things. Been a strange year for them, and they've done great, so I'm proud of that. 7th straight trip to the state tournament, so that's great job for them. I don't have anything more. I think it's a very interesting case. I would say that many lawyers like myself looked at force majeure clauses in the last year for the first time, and probably since I got out of law school, because it's a legitimate, relevant topic with the times. So that makes it sort of interesting too. So, good job. Thanks for coming, everybody.